Good evening. Sure, come on up. You can do better than that. That's better. My name's Dave Dulio, and I'm the director of the Center for Civic Engagement here at Oakland University. We're delighted to welcome you back once again for in-person events here on campus. Thank you for following our protocols for COVID, including filling out your health screener and wearing your masks while you're seated. I would like to recognize a few people and say thank you. First, our terrific staff here in the Oakland Center and our tech support folks. They did yeoman's work preparing for this. There's other folks in the audience that deserve recognition. Rochelle Black, our Vice President for Government and Community Affairs, is here. Thanks, Rochelle. And certainly, Oakland University President Ora Hirsch-Peskovitz deserves great thanks. There is no bigger supporter on campus of the work that we do. We are grateful and thankful for your continued and unwavering support. I'd like to ask President Peskovitz to come up and just say a couple of words.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Dulio. I'm just delighted to welcome everyone here. This is actually the first in-person event of our school year, and I can't think of a more exciting event to actually start our academic year with all of you. As you know, the Center for Civic Engagement has titled this event Toward a More Perfect Union. And as I thought about this, I realized that many of our students were actually not even alive 20 years ago when 9/11 happened. And so I do think that this will be a very important evening tonight as we discuss what happened on 9/11. I also want to acknowledge the Center for Civic Engagement because it is one of the most important centers that we have here at Oakland University. And I'm so thrilled that we have this center under Dr. Dulio's leadership and, of course, the rest of the political science department. And as you're going to hear tonight, we really have bipartisan support for this center. And I see that we have Congressman Mike Rogers here from a distance. I can see you there. Thank you very much for being with us. And of course, Representative Alyssa Slotkin here with us. And we're really delighted to have both of you here. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is civil discussion and debate and tolerance. And tolerance takes so many different forms. And one of the forms is what you're going to hear tonight. And we are so proud of our center in the way that we have these conversations together. And so I'm so thrilled to have this center here at Oakland University. Welcome and thank you all for being here, both in person and online. Thank you very much, Professor Dulio.
Thank you, President Peskovitz. If you've been to one of the center's events before, you know that we serve as a convener of conversations about issues of public importance. Well, the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks is certainly one of those. The terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001 changed our nation and changed the world, when nearly 3,000 people lost their lives as hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We're here tonight to mark the anniversary of that fateful day. We're going to do so in another way tomorrow, shameless plug, in the same room at 7 p.m. when we have a staged reading of a play called Tower Stories. It was written by Damon DeMarco, and the playwright used actual interviews with survivors conducted over a year and a half past 9/11. Tower Stories explores the immediate impact of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, and you can just come right back to this room tomorrow at 7 p.m. and hear a stage reading from students and recent alums from our School of Music, Theater, and Dance. If you've been to one of the center's events, you also know that we want to have these conversations in the right way. In other words, we want to support a conversation that occurs in a civil and respectful manner, as President Peskovitz mentioned. To support that goal, the center has developed what we call the Tenants of Civic Engagement and Productive Dialogue. These tenets are: we will engage in respectful dialogue, employ honest listening, model civil behavior and tone, support free and open discourse, consider viewpoints other than our own, find opportunities to agree, not just disagree. This conversation takes place at a time of great political polarization. Everyone knows that. But let's remember that in the wake of 9/11, in the wake of that tragedy, our nation was united. Let's channel that tonight. You may not agree with everything our guests say, but that doesn't mean that they're the enemy. Toward the end of the discussion, we'll take some audience questions. Those of you here in the Oakland Center have a piece of paper with a QR code on it. You can scan that and you can get to a question submission page. Those of you on Zoom can use the chat function to submit a question. And with that, let's welcome our guests. Moderating our discussion this evening is Roop Raj. He's the co-anchor of the 5 p.m. news at Fox 2 News Detroit. When candidates from either side of the aisle stop in Detroit, Roop interviews them. He's done exclusive interviews with folks like Joe Biden and Donald Trump. You may have heard of them. When Vice President Kamala Harris came to Detroit recently to encourage COVID vaccinations, the White House chose Roop to conduct an exclusive one-on-one interview. Prior to coming back to Detroit in 2009, Roop was an anchor in Flint and New Orleans, Louisiana, where I think he went through 24 hurricanes?
24, yeah.
24 hurricanes. We're delighted and extremely grateful that he's going to lead the discussion this evening. U.S. Representative Alyssa Slotkin is in her second term representing Michigan's 8th Congressional District. Prior to being elected to Congress, Representative Slotkin spent her career in national service. She served as a Middle East analyst with the CIA, working alongside the U.S. military during 3 tours in Iraq as a military expert. In between her tours in Iraq, Representative Slotkin held various defense and intelligence positions under Presidents Bush and Obama. In 2011, Representative Slotkin took a senior position at the Pentagon, and until January 2017, she served as Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. In this role, Representative Slotkin oversaw policy on Russia, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at the Pentagon. Last but not least, joining us virtually from Washington, D.C., Mike Rogers is a former member of Congress representing Michigan's 8th Congressional District. And he previously served as an officer in the U.S. Army and FBI as an FBI special agent. Congressman Rogers built a reputation as a leader on intelligence, cybersecurity, and national security policy from his years of service in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he chaired the powerful House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. As chairman, he authorized and oversaw a budget of $70 billion that funded the nation's 17 intelligence agencies, including a large portion of the national security space architecture. On the Hill, Congressman Rogers worked across the aisle with 2 presidents, congressional leadership, countless diplomats, military service members, and intelligence professionals to ensure the brave men and women who fight for our nation are equipped with the resources necessary to get the job done. Washington Post columnist David Ignatius remarked that Congressman Rogers was a, quote, rare example of bipartisanship. In other words, you'll be hard-pressed to find 2 more experienced and informed individuals to talk about 9/11 20 years later. Thanks, Ruth.
Professor Dulio, thank you. Professor Dulio, thank you so much for your leadership and everything that you're doing with your students. I had the chance to interview Professor Dulio at about 4:45 today for our 5 o'clock news that I usually anchor. I said, we have to cover this on the news. We have to talk about this, not just in this room and on Zoom, but we need to talk about this on television. And so at 5, 6, and 10 tonight, you're going to be hearing from Mr. Dulio and also Representative Slotkin. You know, I was talking to my photojournalist, Kent, who's standing over here, and we were discussing 9/11, and he brought up a really, I think, cogent and important point about history. September 9th, 20 years ago, today, an Afghan leader named Ahmed Massoud was killed. He was the victim of a Taliban attack. The Taliban and those who were in charge of Al-Qaeda and the leadership in that terror cell wanted to get rid of this man so that they could go ahead and do what they were going to do a few days later and then try to manipulate the world in a way in which they could retain power. You can't forget that it was on that sunny day on 9/11 that we remember where we were. But all the planning that went into this for those evil, awful human beings, we cannot forget that either. And I want to really reflect for a moment on where our esteemed guests were at the time. And I want to begin with Congresswoman Slotkin before we get into some of the history. We want to talk about lessons learned. We want to talk about looking into the future. We want to talk about civil discourse and how to have it and the future of Afghanistan. Lots to cover in the next hour. But we'll begin with where you were. Congresswoman, what do you remember about that day?
Sure. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to Oakland University and ROOP, of course, and it's great to be here with Mike Rogers, who's my predecessor by 2 in this job, and I was happy to jump at the chance to be here. I was in New York City on 9/11. I was in my second day of graduate school at Columbia University. I had just moved to New York, and I was in a remedial economics class. Because it had been so long since I had taken econ. And I walked out for a half a minute to make Xerox copies, and a colleague of mine said, "So strange, a little plane just hit the World Trade Center." And, that kicked off a 12 hours that I don't think any American alive at the time forgets. At Columbia, we huddled 400 students around one television. We were watching local TV where we started very quickly to see people literally jumping from the buildings. And then we just started organizing. And it was a moment of that galvanized the students. We thought there'd be a lot of wounded, so we organized a blood drive. We all started donating blood. We volunteered at the Columbia Hospital because families who couldn't find their loved ones were calling every single hospital to see if their loved one had been taken there. And then for the students who couldn't get across bridges and tunnels, we organized to have them stay. So I had people staying on my floor. But the sight of F-16s flying over Manhattan, the smoke and the smell of that smoke for months is just, and then, I happened to live on a street with a fire station that lost 3 first responders who, like every first responder that day, was heading right towards the towers as everyone was running away from the towers. It was just an experience unlike any other, and really, for me, ultimately really changed my life.
And it changed the trajectory of what you would do, and of course, then where you would meet your husband, Dave, who, interesting note, and she'll probably talk about this, they met in Baghdad at Saddam Hussein's palace doing the work that they were doing for this country. That's the first date. All right, so that just kind of sets the stage for you. But we'll talk more about how that day shaped Slotkin's life and in the future, of course, her career. I want to say, Congressman Mike Rogers, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us as well. I just love the fact that we have a Republican and a Democrat together with all of us here today to take us back. When we talk about we will never forget and we will remember, remember a time when this could happen, when you could have a Republican and a Democrat not agree, and that's okay. And that is okay. But on this day, we remember what we agree on. There's a lot. There's a lot we agree on. Congressman Rogers, I want to begin by asking you where you were on that fateful day.
Well, thanks, Roop and Congresswoman. Great to see you, even at a distance. My apologies, President Peskovich. Great. Thanks for doing this. I have to tell you, I was in Howell recently, and someone came up to me and go, "Oh, Congressman Rogers, great to see you. Oh, you'd be so good to know that we finally have good representation here in Congress." I went, "Oh, thanks. Good. Thanks a bunch. Appreciate it. I don't think I'll be going back to that store very often." Just kidding.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of fun. So that's one of those days you just never ever forget. I was a brand new congressman in a freshman term. I actually was preparing for testimony on a bill I had written and was going to get before the committee, which was kind of big and thrilling for a new guy to the Hill. When that first plane went in. So I was in my office prepping for that testimony. My staff member came in and said, "You're going to have to turn this on." There was a plane that ran into one of the Trade Center buildings. And by the time I got out there and was watching and my whole staff was gathered around, the second plane went into the building. And, there wasn't anybody in our room that didn't realize this is not an accident. So we are under assault. The 3 things that kind of stick out to me that day, and we all evacuated. I mean, it was a bit of chaos when Congress was not really organized to run like hell out of the buildings, right? And there was notice that there was another plane inbound that they believed was going to hit the Capitol building. So there was a little bit of chaos, misinformation, all the things you would expect for a drill that didn't happen very often in Congress. But the 3 things that really struck me that day is live watching the people literally jump out of the building so that they wouldn't burn to death, and they jumped to their deaths. The one that strikes me most is the couple that grabbed, they weren't even a couple, they were just a man and a woman who were up in their office and decided they were going to go out together because the fire was so hot, so intense, burning up up the building, that they decided that some 30 floors up, it was a better death to leap to their death. I mean, it's just the visual of that, I don't think ever leaves you. The second was, and about halfway through the day, we decided collectively as members of Congress that we were going to go and have a press conference on the Capitol steps. Some of you may remember that, where we were just going to say, hey, we're here, we're working, we're going to do something about this. America's still here. Don't worry about it, right? And I distinctly remember, and the town was a ghost town by that point. There's nothing moving in Washington, D.C., and it was probably closer to evening now that I think about it. And I was crossing the road from the row of house buildings over to the United States Capitol, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I happened to look down the street, and the caravan of military vehicles. And so nothing's moving, the city is vacant, and here is this caravan of military vehicles moving out to positions around the U.S. Capitol. And, you know, that's just, I mean, it was such a shocking moment to see that in the United States Capitol, where we never had that. You know, we have peaceful changes of power every, 4 or 8 years. You don't see tanks out there. You don't see military gear out there. We do it peacefully. And that's what, one of our prides of our freedom and democracy are. And to see those military vehicles, it just took the air out of me, honestly. We went over, and the last third thing that really struck me, Republicans and Democrats on the House steps, and we were there as a sign of unity to tell America, hey, your government is alive and well. We're gonna get through this. And somebody in the back just started, as we were kind of milling around, singing the Star Spangled Banner. Now, I can't tell you that members of Congress have good voices. I'm not gonna lie to you, they don't. It may have been a little bit off key, but it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Here they are, people from all over the country, all demographics, all political philosophies. And on that day, at least for that moment, we all kind of linked arms and sang the Star Spangled Banner. It was a pretty moving moment to me. And I said, candidly, I knew then, yes, this is going to be hard. Yes, this is going to be tough, but we're going to get through this. We are going to get beyond this. America is too big, too strong, and the collective of who we are as Americans is just too big to be trifled with. And so those are the three kind of big moments on that day for me. And then, of course, it really changed. There was 2 Congresses, one before 9/11, one after. My bill never saw a hearing ever again. I never got even close to it because everything flipped over to a national security posture and how we prepare ourselves for what we assumed was coming.
Well, Congressman and Congresswoman, thank you for your thoughts on that day. You know, today is a day that we want to focus, yes, obviously, on where we were, what we were thinking, how that framed the way we think of our country and of each other. It did bring us together in a way that I think it's safe to say was beautiful, even in the midst of tragedy. I remember, an Indian American guy myself, the son of immigrants who came to this country in the 70s. I was probably a 20-something-year-old young reporter in Flint making $20,000 a year, getting paid not in sunshine. I don't know what they were paying in, but I enjoyed my work there. But the day that happened, the story was so local that no one even understood the gravity, right? I mean, like, we were on the highway, and I got to tell you, both the Congress people appreciate this, and it's not recommended to do this at any stage, but a bunch of veterans stopped on I-75 in Flint-Saginaw area and took road flares and lit up an area that they could then stage at. So for every car that passed by, they were waving the American flag with tears in their eyes, saying that this is our country and no one takes this away from us. That was on the night of 9/11. Somewhere between Flint and Saginaw. And I just think about how all news is local. What happens in New York affects us here. But that was a wound to all of us in our nation. How then do we move forward? How do we come out of this 20 years later and frame this and look at things that could have been framed as maybe something positive that came out of this? And I know, Congresswoman Slotkin, you and I talked about this. My goodness, you were a CIA analyst and you worked at the Department of Defense. The Homeland Security Department didn't even exist. The TSA, as we know it, of course, was created. Talk about those changes that happened immediately after 9/11.
Yeah, well, and Mike will also have lots to say because he had a bird's eye view of it. I think, after 9/11, we made significant changes in our intelligence enterprise and our law enforcement enterprise and in Homeland Security. We literally started the Department of Homeland Security and created a new cabinet level position. We took a bunch of different agencies that were off on their own and put them under one umbrella, like TSA, like Customs and Border. And I think Americans just got a sort of really sort of accelerated lesson in how do you protect yourself. We are in largely, like an island nation. I mean, we are not used to being attacked on our soil. So I think the American public was just desperate for leadership to reorganize. I know certainly, as someone who was recruited by the CIA right out of grad school, they came after 9/11, hiring a generation of what's called the 9/11 babies, who all came in at the same time. The real focus was, how did we miss this? And how do we make sure that never again do we have a situation where the CIA isn't talking to the FBI and they're not talking to, the Treasury Department and they're not talking to everybody? It really created this sort of information sharing requirement that didn't exist, at least as I understand it, before 9/11, so that now it would be strange for a young analyst to come into the CIA and not have to work directly with their counterparts in other agencies, because we had to acknowledge that we had missed signs. So it really changed a ton about how we were organized and how we thought about our own protection.
Congressman, I want to ask you, you're a security analyst for a reason that's tapped by network television all the time to talk about those types of things and these things that we now look at as warning signs to make sure this never happens again. Talk about what you learned then and how much better and how much safer America is, do you think?
Well, listen, I right off the bat, we are going to have a problem with extremism for some time to come. And everywhere where extremism can foster within the limits of freedom of movement, freedom to finance, freedom to recruit, freedom to train, freedom to finance themselves, we are in trouble. And unfortunately, there are still spots in the world that do that. And what I think we missed leading up to it, and I think this was to the Congresswoman's point as well, it wasn't just the details of the day of 9/11. We kind of missed the big sweep. And so if you think about it, in 1993, this same terrorist organization hit the World Trade Center. They had a desire to bring it down. Now their math wasn't good. They tried to do it at the bottom. They later realized they had to go higher up in the building to bring it down. Well, but they did do it in 93. They hit the same terrorist organization, killed over 200 people by attacking the U.S. Embassy in Kenya. And most people kind of yawned. We didn't pay attention to it. So you think about it, that was a 5-year difference for a major event. In 2000, they attacked the USS Cole, killed 11 sailors, U.S. military personnel on the ship. And it was, a really big tragedy. Less than a year later was 9/11. So they were committed to their path of trying to get at the United States of America. And I think a little bit of arrogance amongst all the agencies, amongst the population, amongst politicos, like, hey, we're the United States. What are they going to do to us, really? I mean, they can't really hurt us too bad. Well, we saw what happened. And so that wasn't the most exciting place to be if you were in the intelligence business back then, right? You thought, well, that wasn't great. We wanted to be doing other things. Well, 9/11 changed all that. So we missed the big sweep. And then the Congresswoman was right. We had a terrible way of how we collected and synthesized and analyzed information coming from all of the intelligence collection points that we would have, including domestic, FBI, CIA, DIA, all of it. And there was a lot of silos. And so we worked to try to eliminate a lot of that. The DNI was created, Director of National Intelligence, put all the 17 agencies in one place to try to have some consistency and forced information sharing. But I will tell you, those first few years, as someone went through and watched all this, we had problems. I mean, the agencies didn't want to send people there, and they'd rather stay in their home agency. So it was a cultural change that had to kind of happen over a period of years. All of that, I would argue, has helped us. We're better off. We have better collection platforms. We know how to synthesize and analyze information in a better way. Nothing's perfect. Remember, intelligence is how many pieces of that puzzle can I give a policymaker to have a good decision made? And you don't get all 1,000 pieces. You just don't. And so you have to have, that's why we have analysts that say, oh, you gave me 300, so let me tell you what I think is going on in this thing, and then try to make a decision. So all of that I think is better. I do worry about certainly the activity the last couple of weeks is put us back on our heels a little bit when we now have an organization who housed, the very reason we went to Afghanistan is because they housed Al-Qaeda and let them train, finance, recruit. We know that Al-Qaeda is in 15 provinces in Afghanistan still today, and we just don't have the ability to get at them like we used to. So that's going to be a problem. Yemen's going to be a problem. There's places in Africa that are still going to be a problem. Many of those folks in the terrorist business, if you will, who were pledged to Al-Qaeda have now pledged to ISIS. That could turn around again. Remember, they're more fungible than we think they are. It's an extremism ideology, and it's not going away. So some notion that we're done, I think is just wrong. And I worry that we're going to get into that same melees of 93 to 98 to 2000 to 2001. It's easy to forget about it if it happens somewhere else. That's my only concern. I think we're better equipped for it here in the United States, but we still haven't really come to grips that we're going to be battling extremism for a very long time.
Congresswoman, CIA analyst, your experience, of course, leads you to think a lot about this. When you saw in the last few days what's happened, and even today, the development, I don't know if you heard the news, but these Americans were released by Taliban that said, okay, well, let these Americans go home. First of all, frame that for us. Why would the Taliban do that? And what is going on right now in your mind?
Well, first off, let me say, I don't know anyone who feels good about how the withdrawal went. I don't know how anyone could look at those pictures and feel good. And some of the hardest conversations that I've had to have over the past 3-4 weeks have been with veterans who served in Afghanistan. And it is, there's a despondency and a feeling like, I sacrificed my friends and my life and my health and my family, and for what? And those are difficult conversations that we're going to be grappling with for a long time. I think what we're seeing now is the Taliban wants us to believe that they are different, that they have evolved, that they are ready to join the family of nations and be taken seriously. They want recognition. They want to come to the UN General Assembly in New York. They want to go shopping in Dubai and not be under sanction. They want to be taken seriously. And I think they're saying that. I'm not sure the decisions they've made on who's in their government have not gone the right direction. They literally have a member of a terrorist organization as their Minister of Interior, someone who is a designated terrorist by the United States of America. But I think part of what they're doing now is trying to show that they're playing nice and allow at least the American citizens and some of our additional third country nationals and others to come out. That's the first flight that we've seen. The Qataris are playing an absolutely critical middleman role. And so I think you'll see some additional flights like this. But I think there's a big difference between watching what they say and watching what they do. And I very much hope, and I've certainly been urging the Biden administration to hold them to account and not give them these things that they want so badly unless they demonstrate a real change in behavior. And right now, first indications are not positive.
Congressman, your thoughts as soon as you heard that headline about the Americans being released by the Taliban?
Yeah, I mean, we think we expected some of that. It's basically the ratios of the planes. And so I have a lot closer to this. My wife has been engaged in trying to help several groups of women get out of Afghanistan. And I am playing a supporting role. She tells me what to do, and I pick up the phone and do it. Trust me. That's the easiest way to get stuff done in our house, for sure. So we have seen it from on the ground. And so there are teams on the ground who are actually moving people on the ground to try to get them out. And these are people, by the way, who've committed themselves to the United States. They may be Afghan citizens, but they have taken huge risks. And the Taliban has not been good to them. There are still kill lists. There are still raiding homes and trying to find these people. And the reason I believe that you have the terrorist in charge of the interior, and by the way, the Ministry of Interior in Afghanistan is basically their intelligence services. We think of it as parks and nice things. It's their intelligence services. So now they have access to every file, every person that may have cooperated. All of that was not, there was no quick ability to get rid of a lot of that, and they have access to it. And after that, you can see on the ground and talking to the teams and these are private teams, by the way. This is a story that needs to be told when this is all done, about the private sector people who, some left their families and went over. A lot of former military, a lot of former intelligence. My wife served in Iraq as well. And all of those relationships, they're putting them together to try to get people out, if they can, who are subject to these kill lists. So, I'm kind of where the Congresswoman is. They are saying one thing to the public, they're doing quite another. The reason they said that women couldn't go to work yet is because they needed to teach Taliban soldiers how to treat women. All right, let's be candid with ourselves. They are a terrorist organization that was, you couldn't teach girls how to read. And their big concession was, well, we'll let them go into the 6th grade. The reason they do that, and there's a huge illiteracy rate amongst the Taliban, it's off the chart. Nationally, it's about 55% are illiterate. And is because the Taliban fighters are mostly illiterate. So they believe whatever they're told is in the Quran, and that's the way that they've raised their families, including women. And so education is an absolute threat to that Taliban rule. Because if you actually read the Quran, it has nothing to do with the Taliban conducts themselves. So we just got a call the other day about 2 women who were stoned, who survived, and are now making a run for the northern border. This just happened recently. And so all of these cases tell me that, the people who want to go to New York and want to go shopping are the people that we welcomed into Doha and we showed them the rest of the world. That's a very small percentage of who the Taliban is. So I think we're in for a rough road here. And I think if they can find the people that cooperate with the United States, they're not going to make it. We know my wife was working on a case and I was helping her with these 29 women that we trained, the United States trained, to follow special forces raids to help with on-site events. So you get there, a special forces raid. They would be the Afghan women trained with our special forces to go in and deal with the children and women in these cases and try to calm things down. They kind of got left. They were literally left. And so I think they ended up getting all 21 out. I think 2 were killed by the Taliban. One was run over by a Taliban vehicle trying to escape. All of their homes were being raided. That does not sound like someone who is ready to be recognized by nations. So I think I'm glad these flights have gone out. I have to tell you, there are hundreds in safe houses. I can tell you that for a fact. Thousands who are on their own trying to hide to get to places where they can get out. And we shouldn't take this as a victory. We should take this as, you should have done this last week. And any notion we should praise them or pat them on the back and say, boy, isn't that great, is just wrong. There's a lot that we can put pressure on. I mean, not the same as being there, but there's a lot of pressure we can put on. We ought to do it every day. That we just heard today, as a matter of fact, that the planes are going to be routed through Kabul. So I know what they're doing. They're checking the lists of the list that they find on the lists on those manifests. And the reason that there's all these people in safe houses trying to get on airplanes around the country is because of that. They know that their clock is a ticking. And these are people, candidly, who risked everything to stand with us. And I sure hope we don't turn our back on these people as a country. I don't think that would speak well of us at all.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we were inundated with over 1,000 Afghans asking for help in my congressional office. And we made a decision that we could drill down and help, in the end, 118, most of whom are affiliated with Michigan State and who were working for Michigan State and for USAID. These are educated women, agronomists and scientists and their families, and then a bunch of deputy ministers, the Deputy Minister of Health, the head of the EPA for Afghanistan. We got out actually to Albania. And I think if I can say one amazing thing in the midst of this just terrible scene that we all watched unfold was the absolute ingenuity of Americans and other folks from other countries who went above and beyond to get people that they worked with out. This moral commitment that people felt because they had a translator or someone who helped them in operations, someone who worked at the embassy, and that sort of like brother at arms commitment drove people and incredibly diverse groups of people. I mean, I worked deeply with H.R. McMaster, who was the former national security advisor under Trump. He had 47 Afghans he was focused on. I had a plane. He had an organization that could support them when they got to Albania, and so we worked together to get these groups out. There were legions of West Point alumni who helped me get, contact 10th Cavalry and get people through the gates at the airport. I mean, it was a deeply difficult thing to watch on the screens, but below the surface was the best of America. It was people stepping up and really, like Mike's wife, to just figure out what can I do in this hour of need for people I worked with. And it was a story that's under the radar, but inspiring in the midst of the tragedy.
You keep talking about the great military that this country has. These are brothers and sisters. These are sons and daughters. These are people who live right here in Metro Detroit and all over the country. We can't have a day like this and not recognize the valor, the commitment, the courage, the passion, and the love that these men and women have. While I'm hanging out at Channel 2, anchoring the news and reporting on things, going to the Whole Foods to pick up groceries, enjoying the freedom of our life, for 20 years, these men and women were in Afghanistan fighting to make sure that our shores were safe. Mike, I want to just give you a chance to reflect on the gratitude you have for these men and women as well.
Well, first of all, the courage is unbelievable. And I'll tell you an Afghan leader's perspective on our U.S. military. It has a Michigan connection. The former, now vice president, who's now up in Panjshir, declaring that he's going to be the resistance, if you will. He was in the room, by the way, in that story that you told in the beginning about the killing of Massoud, who is the leader of something called the Northern Alliance, who was the main, the bane of the Taliban existence. And these are people who knew that extremism was only going to lead to a bad place. Well, they were very clever. They actually used a TV camera. Just you think of that to get in. He granted a TV interview. That TV camera was loaded with explosives. One of the guys that was in that room is a guy named Amarilla Souley. And he ended up, he self-taught him after that. He self-taught himself English. The Americans came, and he actually got an honorary degree from Cleary University right here in the great state of Michigan. And when I first got here, I took him around. He said, I want to see Detroit. I want to see Detroit. So I took him down to Detroit. And when he first got off the plane, he said, why would any American leave this place and come 5,000 miles away to Afghanistan? I don't understand that. I just do not understand. At the end of the week, he talked to people at Michigan State. He went through this wonderful experience at Cleary University. He stopped and he said, I have never seen a more welcoming, courageous, freedom-loving people in my life. He said, I understand why these people would suit up to try to give both safety for their families and freedom to someone else's families. And so when you think about all of the hardship from a very small number of Americans, actually, who served in both of these conflicts, it really is something to behold. And it is really the key and the heart of who we are as Americans. Their bravery and courage is as great as any other generation. They volunteered to be there. Most of them had multiple tours, the ones that had stayed in long enough. And they were willing to risk life and limb because they knew it kept their families safe by keeping extremism at bay. And they knew that if we could bring freedom, think of this, if we could get women of Afghanistan into society and reading and understanding the Quran, that helps our national security in the future. Most of your average soldiers know that. And I think that's why, to the Congresswoman's point, that these members were saying, the military former members were saying, man, I was willing to risk all of that. What just happened? So I tell you, they really are part of the greatest generation certainly of our time. In their bravery, courage, and sacrifice. 16 Medal of Honor winners between Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you read those stories, I highly encourage you, just go online and read the stories. Unbelievable amounts of courage. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. There were courage, moment after moment where people were saving their colleagues in arms, saving Afghans who are standing with them. Unbelievable. That's the true, you want to find out what America's heart is still beating. You look at that group of human beings and what they've done for this country. And a lot of them, I think to the congressman's point, all of these networks that my wife and I are working with are all private sector work. They're not even the government. And we had the same issues coordinating with aircraft, ground movements. We actually put security teams together on the ground privately outside of the government to try to get people out of harm's way. Unbelievable. I mean, this really speaks, in this, in a very dark period, just how wonderful these men and women are that have committed themselves to service and freedom in the country.
And that's the character of this country. When you talk about the character of this country, when I talk to relatives, cousins of mine in India and London and other places, and they often like to frame things the way the media frames things because that's all they see. So they see what they see and they think that's America. And I said, would you stop watching the celebrities and just the sports athletes and all these guys and gals and look at the everyday men and women, the salt of the earth people who live in Macomb and Oakland and Washington counties who suit up and go and do things that we never dream of doing. Your husband is one of those people, and you met him there. Could you take us through that story and then lead us back to the conversation about the pride you feel?
Sure. I met my husband where every good girl from Michigan meets her husband, which is Saddam Hussein's palace. And I was on my third tour in Iraq, and he was working for General Petraeus. He's an Apache pilot, but as a colonel was put into a strategy position for General Petraeus, and we were on the negotiating team. We were negotiating the status of forces with the Iraqis after 2008, so we met on the same negotiating team. And Saddam Hussein's palace is, full of marble and gold toilets and carved, just murals of Saddam Hussein everywhere. It's not a romantic place, is what I'm saying. It's not romantic. And we had our first, date at the Chow Hall, and he stayed on much longer than I did. Like many who served, as Mike said, in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was tour after tour, extension after extension. You'd get back, you'd have barely a year of your life back home, and you would turn around and go back again. And it, not long after that, I became an Army wife. And I think now I'm an Army stepmom, right? My stepdaughter graduated from West Point, and my son-in-law, her and my son-in-law were classmates, and they're both young Army officers now. And I think it's one thing, we all say good things about our military, and I thank God, actually, that unlike my father-in-law who served in Vietnam, when he came back from that conflict, people spit on him. And no matter what you have against the policy that leads us into war, it still baffles me that we took it out on those who were, in many cases, drafted to go there and serve. And so I thank God that no matter what people think about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they respect those who serve, and we don't have that same problem that the previous generation suffered through. But I do think that being an Army wife really shows you the level of sacrifice that is going on when you make a decision to serve in a war zone. First of all, it is a family affair. The idea that you send a loved one off, and every single one of us, your extended family, are on pins and needles the entire time. Anytime there's any kind of attack in that entire country, you just feel like it could be your loved one. It's a major disruption to your life. You can't live a normal life when you're going back and forth. You're constantly either coming and going. You miss major events. I mean, the number of events my husband missed in my stepdaughter's life that you can't ever get back. And then I think for most, the thing that surprises me the most is with all that hardship, the average person who volunteers to serve in the military is deeply committed to mission. And that mission is what drives them. It's certainly not money. It's certainly not fame and fortune and popularity. And you see that up close. And most of the folks that, are now obviously my social network, they do all of these things. They don't ask for any glory. And maybe you'll have a little ceremony when they retire to recognize what they did. But the average American doesn't doesn't internalize what it means for a family's life to have a loved one in service. And lastly, I will just say, you know, I know that we will be debating what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, people will write their PhDs on it. We'll be talking about it forever. What I feel strongly about is that the US military kept these terrorists busy for 20 years so that we could build up our defenses in the United States, we could improve our homeland security, we can improve our own sense of security. We have not had another, knock on wood, major terrorist attack since 9/11, and our military created that situation. Obviously it's personal for me, but when we say sacrifice, there's a lot that goes into that one word.
And afterwards, the trauma that people feel when they're there. My wife Julie's cousin Kenny, we see every Christmas, served in Afghanistan, and he's dealt with a lot when it comes to PTSD, and a lot that the family then deals with afterwards. And so it's a lifelong commitment, and one that we will forever be indebted for. We have some questions from the audience that we want to get to as we wrap things up here. We have an audience question here saying, some have argued that the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan means that we have turned the terrorism threat back to pre-9/11. I want to begin with, actually, Congresswoman, would you agree?
Well, certainly there is no doubt that we're going to have to keep our eye on Afghanistan, and the very same actors that enabled Al-Qaeda are now in power, and so we can't take our eye off the ball. We are going to have to, at least I hope, we will have a robust over-the-horizon presence so that we are, as best as we can, keeping tabs on what these groups did and then taking military action where necessary. So I think that there's no way to discard that the fact that these similar groups are back and that they still pose a threat. I think what is fundamentally different is the way we protect ourselves, our defense. And our defense is fundamentally different than what it was on September 10th, 2001. That doesn't mean we can get lazy. That doesn't mean we can't be thinking about what the next threat is going to look like. But that is, I think, completely different because of the investments we've made in our own homeland defense.
Congressman, your thoughts on that? Are we any better off? I mean, we are, based on what we heard Congresswoman talk about, the Homeland Security Department, all of the measures in place. But what is there more that needs to be done?
Sure, and listen, I've watched the build of all of that and was a part of the build of all of that, and we are better, but here's the problem. So is our adversary. They are also better. And matter of fact, they have a better media shop than I think the Department of Defense does today. I mean, it's unbelievable how good they are about spinning the narrative of what they see happening back to a greater public, and I think that's concerning to me. But think about where we are. I mean, we are this, and I respect the Congresswoman's position, but this over-the-horizon thing is fantasy. It is fantasy because the nearest strike flight is about 7 hours, the package that you could deliver. And I was very intimately involved in all this, including all the strikes that happened in Afghanistan. Spent a lot of time in the eastern provinces and the western provinces in the Fatah in Pakistan. You can't do it by remote control. You just can't do it. If we could have done that, I think we would have had the Taliban already. It is a very difficult, nimble ideology that we fight there, that extremism. And they're now large and in charge. You get outside the city of Kabul or Mazar Sharif, Kandahar included, and they are the same exact tribes, tribal leaders, practices, culture that they were when we found them, when we went after them. Except now we just don't have the ability to strike them if they are organizing, getting ready to pull the trigger on an event. We have to ask permission for a whole lot of people. Remember, it's a landlocked country. And I talked to the a very senior Pakistani national security official about 2 weeks ago. And there was some discussion about, hey, maybe Pakistan could really help us on this counterterrorism front. And I've got to tell you, and I've known the Pakistanis for a while, I got the stop and a cold stare that said, who would ever trust the United States again? Certainly not us, right? They're not always our friends. But when you get that cold stare from someone that you have a relationship with, we're going to have problems with it. So I think, and even the administration, when they pulled out, they acknowledged that there's going to be terrorism problems and we're going to try to fight it over the horizon. I just don't think that works. I think it's going to make the folks that we employ around the world doing other missions, just makes everything a little bit more dangerous. And again, I'm worried that we're right back in this cycle. Well, it's done, it's easy, fast food society. We have a press conference and terrorism is no longer, we can leave. You know, I never looked at it as the forever war. I looked at it as enduring peace. And we were there to try to disable some of that activity, just like we stayed in South Korea. Guess what? To push back on Chinese aggression now, some 50 years later. Same with Germany. Now our troops and our presence, long time, we've been there 80 years, but now whenever it's not a forever war, we're now we can kind of stabilize the region and be a counterweight to the Russian activity. I saw the same thing in a place like Afghanistan. It wouldn't have taken a lot. And now, you know, listen, on our 20th anniversary, the Taliban's going to be sitting in the United States Embassy that we built that was very expensive because we hardened it, and drinking tea, looking through our files, right? I mean, some of that is not literal, but you think about where we've come, and the extremism problem isn't any better. We're still taking out targets in Africa as a part of these organizations. So I'm very, very concerned about it. And I'm very worried that we can nonchalantly say, no worries, we'll take it, we'll fly a drone over it and it'll be fine. It's just not going to work the way we think it is.
Do we go back? Do we go back to Afghanistan? Do you see that as a possibility?
I hate to say this, I think we will be back at some point. There's no way around it. If you have these groups, no one's going to do it for us. Remember, the Taliban has more in common with ISIS, even though they're fighting right now, and more in common with Al-Qaeda than they do the United States or any country in the West. That philosophies are much closer. That's why these groups have been changing. You have fighters went from Al-Qaeda to ISIS because they thought that they were more extreme. You'll have ISIS fighters go back to Al-Qaeda because they're getting ready to do operations. You'll have Taliban tribal leaders who are going to say, you know what? I didn't like the Americans anyway. They killed a lot of our terrorist friends. Sure, you want to train and work. And by the way, opium production is the first thing the Taliban took over. So opium production's going up. I mean, I can't find one good national security event that just happened. We're just going to have to count on this new structure, and all of these brave souls who are going to have to work long hours to try to make sure they never make it here.
Congresswoman, can we count on it, or do we go back in your mind? And I know that I'm not asking you from a policy point of view, but just what you see in the future. This isn't done? Are Americans going back to Afghanistan?
Well, look, I think the average American understands that, in an ideal world, we're not in wars forever. And the fundamental difference between Germany and South Korea is that no one is shooting at us in Germany and South Korea. The amount that it takes to protect ourselves and the American body bags that come back from Afghanistan are different. And I think that the American public largely felt like, 20 years is a long time. I've talked to veterans who were sending their sons off to the same war that they fought in 19 years ago. That said, I think we should count on military action being taken in Afghanistan in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. I mean, for sure. I mean, we've already, as we were pulling out, we conducted a drone strike, right? So I think that this idea that we're done with Afghanistan is not realistic. That said, I think that we also have to acknowledge, and I'm a national security person by training, so is Mike, but we have to acknowledge that the generation that's coming up, the students I just met from OU, right? They don't see the world in the way that maybe I see the world. They are more pessimistic about America's role in the world. They were not around on 9/11 and see us getting engaged in these long wars that are hard to get out of, mobilizing others. There is a different approach from the next generation. And while I may not agree, as a Cold War kid that believes in a strong role for the United States in the world, I think that we have to at least acknowledge that the American public felt like this war had gone on a long time and that they don't want their sons and daughters being sent there. That said, we're going to see military action. I just hope it's not a sort of another long-term ground war there.
Another question from our audience saying the fact that for 20 years there was American involvement in Afghanistan and yet there were no terror attacks here, does that make that a success?
Well, like I said, I mean, if you would have asked me on 9/11, and I'd be interested in Mike's view on this, if you would have said to me, it's 9/11, we're not going to have another major terrorist attack from abroad for 20 years, I wouldn't have put money on that. So I think that what we were able to do, both at abroad and home, kept us safe and kept us all focusing on our own lives and not having to worry about going out in public and being attacked and those kinds of things that we were so fearful of right after 9/11. So I do think that it was important, and I do think that that is why we owe our military thanks. Does that mean that all our objectives were met and that we came out of there cleanly? No.
Congressman, I want to give that question to you from our audience member. Afghanistan, the involvement is over for now, but in the time that we were there were no terror attacks here in the U.S. Success?
I would argue absolutely. The most impactful program in counterterrorism disruption was our ability to strike enemy combatants across both Afghanistan and other places, by the way. And that was based on presence. Remember, in the intelligence business, they'll teach you three things up front in the very first class you get into. Access, access, and access, right? If you don't have access to people that you're trying to understand and get their intentions, you're not going to get a clear picture. And so there was a bit of a gallows humor, if you will, about the chief operating officer of Al-Qaeda. Never survived very long because, and that, by the way, was outrageously disruptive. And that person is the one that says, somebody gives him the order at the time, it was Osama bin Laden for most of this 20 years, and said, hey, go out and we want you to strike the Americans some way, get them on airplanes. And by the way, all of these plots were disrupted. I mean, when it finally is told, all of the plots disrupted and how we were able to keep hammering these groups who want to strike America. I have to tell you, I'm proud of the men and women who served there, and I know it was difficult on all the circumstances. I have a son in the military. I served in the military. My brother served in the military. My father was in the military. I get it, and it's hard on the families as well. But having that presence, they are the single greatest factor on why we didn't have a terrorist attack here. And, I think most of them feel a little disappointed they couldn't stay and finish the job. And remember, how we were going to win this fight wasn't necessarily with continuing those strikes. It was educating half the population, which were women, to be part of Afghan society. And we asked them to come out of their homes, like come out of the back of your home and risk your life and participate. Taliban ain't going for that. And so that was our long-term strategy. And by the way, we had really courageous women open businesses, and some ran for parliament. We had some in the government offices. I mean, it was pretty impressive for a place like Afghanistan. That's all coming to a screeching halt. They just, announced their shura. Guess what? Not one woman involved, right? They are not going forward. And if you get half your population engaged, my wife would tell you it's probably the better part of the population, certainly the smartest. You can finally bring a level of security. They don't want their sons running off and doing these terrorist acts. That's what we never told the American people. We never walked the American people through why we were there, what the sacrifice was worth, and where we were going, and why wouldn't it be important. I think they're getting a feeling now because of all these women we're trying to get out of Afghanistan who are actually getting death sentences from the Taliban. I think they're finally starting to get, okay, maybe we needed to be there a little longer.
We have time just for, some closing thoughts from both of our esteemed guests today, but I do want to say, just to kind of frame that last question that I think is important, I learned myself in covering this last election a couple of things. When you go to a rally for Biden or a rally for Trump, and you actually go into the audience and you talk to everyday Metro Detroiters and Americans and ask them their why. And that's what I got to do when I was at these rallies. I would go to a Biden rally and say, why? Why are you voting for this person? Go to a Trump rally, why? And actually come from a place of curiosity to know why it is that people think and feel the way they do. We start coming together, and we start coming together in a way that says, I may not agree with you, but at least I understand you. We can't let the media frame our narrative. We have to go out in our communities and do it ourselves. I believe that. And I think that good media institutions out there, we like to think we're one of them, can hopefully bring those conversations to television. But the bottom line is it's up to us at a coffee shop to sit across from someone we don't agree with and do our part to keep peace in our communities and then hope and pray that there's peace elsewhere. And so as we move forward after 9/11, 20 years later, I want to leave it here. How do we become better? How do we become stronger? And how do we become more cohesive and more united as we are the United States of America? Congresswoman Slotkin.
Well, I think that, for me, I guess it goes back to those days and weeks right after 9/11 where, I would go down to the local bodega and there'd be a line, of folks waiting to buy food, and they were talking to each other. I mean, in New York, people don't really talk to each other. They don't talk, there's not a friendly place. And I finally got up to the checkout counter, and the woman behind the counter I said, thank you so much for working. I know it's right after the attack and very few things are open. And she said, this has been the best day I've ever had at work, because every single person has acknowledged me, said something to me, treated me like a human being. And I think that is really all we're talking about. We're not gonna all agree. We don't. And there's no harm to that. But when we start looking at a fellow American as an enemy, as someone who we don't have empathy for, who we're not looking to understand, we have a real problem. And I think that, to me, that empathy that we felt for each other, even very different Americans, in the days and weeks after 9/11, that same spirit, we're very far from it now, but if we could figure out a way to harness that and just try and be decent, I think we would go a long way. And when people say to me, the most common thing I get common question I get in Michigan is like, how do we get better? We're not well, how do we get better? And I tell people, actually don't go to the rally, right? Don't turn off your screen, don't watch the news, go and volunteer on something that has nothing to do with politics, that is a mission you care about. Meet people who have nothing in common with you. If you love to rescue dogs, go rescue dogs. If you want to serve the homeless, go serve the homeless. Do something for your community that gets you out of your own head and meeting people who are different than you, who care about a mission. It's the best thing you can do for your community and your country.
Beautiful thought. I like what you said, and as you said, in the spirit of disagreeing as fellow Americans, I'd say keep the screen on for a little while, watch a little bit
The
of
5
news,
o'clock news.
and then go rescue the
Local
dogs.
news.
You can do both. We can have it all. This is America. Congresswoman, thank you for that. That was beautiful. Congressman, your thoughts. How do we come together?
Yeah, I do worry about the Congresswoman's interchange with those students, because I think she and I are probably pretty close on our national security thoughts and where America is. But we spend a lot of time in this country tearing ourselves down. And we have our adversaries joining in this fight, by the way. When the Russians really did get engaged, and I'm sorry for the folks in the audience, but they did. They tried to influence the election, and not because they wanted one person or the other. They were trying to get Americans to hate each other. They wanted chaos. They were using social media to get, black activist groups pitted against white nationalist groups, and they wanted them to show up at the same place. These were Russian activities, information activities. And we as Americans seem to have just decided that we're so gullible, we're going to take all of it, not realizing what we have in common. I will tell you, my first trip to Afghanistan, there was a woman who was a trained orthopedic surgeon, and we were early. I went with a guy named Dave Hobson from Ohio. We were the first two in, and I wanted to go to a children's hospital there, and he had some other work to do there, so we were able to get there. And there's still fighting going on the outskirts of the city. And I'll never forget this, because we went in the children's hospital. I was greeted by this woman who spoke fluent English. I mean, better English than mine. And I was a little taken back by that. And she was telling about all the things she didn't have here. She didn't have anesthetics. And by the way, she was a orthopedic surgeon trained in the United States. Didn't have the right surgical equipment. You walk through the ward. There were 2 and 3 and 4 children per bed, because they didn't have the ability to treat them any other way. And the Taliban, by the way, had sent all the nurses home when they took over in '96 because they were women, and you can't have women working, of course, right? So they sent all the nurses home. So the only mothers were in there trying to care for these people who were not trained nurses. It was a disaster. And I'll never forget, she said, well, just right there in that bed. And there was just, then a round of explosions went off. And I said, wow, does that bother you? Does it bother you that the United States is here? And I'll never forget this, because I was wearing a jacket. She grabbed my jacket and she looked me in the eye and she said, yesterday I had to amputate the arm and a leg of an 8-year-old boy that had stepped on a Soviet mine. And she said their parents brought this child on a cart with a donkey almost 10 miles to get here. if it weren't for the United, she said, I don't know if he's going to survive. I had none of the right equipment. I didn't have the right antibiotics. I really had nothing. And our local guys, by the way, were trying to help with this. But she said, if it weren't for the United States of America, who would care enough about that young boy or this woman who is willing to risk her life to be in this hospital today? Because she had been imprisoned in her home for 6 years. I mean, that's what I want this next generation to understand. You are standing on the shoulders of giants. And the fact that we decide that we hate each other so much that we can't even sit in a room and say, really, let me hear your opinion. I might disagree with that, but let me tell you why I disagree. We've lost that. And our adversaries want us to lose that. This is the greatest country on the face of the earth, and we should stop telling each other and our neighbors it's not. And I highly recommend people get around the world and see what freedoms we have and what experiences we have that the other people in the world have no idea how good we have it. I think of Amarilla Soleil, who said, by the way, he was in some of the worst places of Detroit, said, I've never seen anything more beautiful in my life. Right? You think about that. We need to stop tearing each other down. We need to start coming together in a way that says, listen, we have our faults, we have our differences, we might want to go different directions here and there, but at the end of the day, it is the greatest country on the face of the earth. Why would we be so willing to sell it, to give it up, to disparage it? Again, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. This is the generation that's really going to have to step up and understand. And the very people around the world who still want a little piece of what we have, meaning they'll take it either through bombs and buildings or other means, are still active and aggressive trying to do it. Let's not help them. Let's help ourselves. Let's build ourselves up. Let's get back to that day when we can be really proud of who we are as a country and as a community. We do that, there's no foe we can't beat. If we allow them to win this divisive attitude between Americans, we'll cease to be a great country in 10 years. And I just don't think we need to do that. Anyway, you get me passionate. Sorry, Roop.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, you're passionate, and so is Congresswoman Slotkin. I think everybody in this room is passionate. The character of this country is not defined by red or blue, but red, white, and blue. And the other day, I had someone with a flag on the back of their truck that they were driving with on the back of their pickup. And I was telling the Congresswoman, I said, that flag means so much to my dad, who came here in 1973 with $5 in his pocket. My mom stayed back, and they had to figure out a way to get her here by making enough money to make that happen, living with a relative. And now they live in Rochester, and they love life. But my dad always taught me, after 9/11, that never forget what that flag means to you. It's personal. It's personal, and all of us collectively can take pride in that flag and what it represents. But what you two represent is you know what? It's not good old-fashioned American politics. It's good old-fashioned American service. And I think both Mike Rogers and Alyssa Slotkin embody that in great ways. And I want to say thank you to both of our esteemed guests today. Please put your hands together for Congressman Mike Rogers, Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin.
Thank you.
And Madam President, Dr. Peskovitz, thank you for having us here on your campus today and the work that you're doing. Thank you, and have a good night, everyone. Thanks for watching at home.
Thanks, everybody.